Hello everyone and good morning. Recently I've helped a few people into the Lotus brand, and when doing that I've actually been reminded that if you aren't familiar with the cars that they make, the range can actually be a little confusing. So today I've come down to Stratton Motor Company, where they conveniently have some great examples of the current Lotus range for me to show you guys exactly what the differences are, and if you're looking for a new Lotus, hopefully help you decide which one could be right for you. So let's start with the one that everybody knows, the iconic Elise. Already a legend in its own lifetime, the Elise was introduced, if you can believe it, in 1996, over 20 years ago. Now the car, of course, has changed a fair bit since then, and it's in its third generation. But the car's core principles of high performance and enjoyment through lightweight have remained reasonably unchanged. Today you can spend anywhere between about £32,000 to £55,000 on a new Elise. The range currently has about 5 distinct models, excluding track-only versions. The base car has a 1.6 litre naturally aspirated Toyota 4-cylinder engine, producing about 130 odd horsepower. However, the rest of the range uses versions of the 1.8 litre Toyota engine with a supercharger attached. This car in front of me is probably the most popular of the Elise range. It's the Sport 220. 220 PS plus a curb weight of about 900 kilos to give reasonably impressive performance. 0 to 60 is about 4.2 seconds, and it goes on to a top speed of about 140 miles an hour. Of course, the Elise experience isn't just about numbers, it's about the way the car drives. And this car still has no power steering, and it comes with very few luxuries as standard. Of course, you can add things. So this car has a very nice leather interior, it's got air conditioning, it's got a CD player, all these nice things, but they are optional extras. As standard, the cars do not come with anything that doesn't help it go down the road. I'm a really big fan of the Elise. As you know, I have a 2005 111R, and that car is a lot less refined than the modern cars. You can spend some time in them, but in my opinion, they aren't really suited for GT work, and I know Lotus would agree with me. What they are absolutely brilliant at is weekend fun and having a blast. It's worth mentioning that all of the cars in both the Elise and the Exige range are available with both hard and soft tops. This car currently has a hard top fitted to it. Most Elises come with a soft top as standard, to which you can then add a hard top. Most Exiges are the other way around, coming with a hard top as standard, which you can then convert to soft top specification if you wish at a later date. The hard top isn't the easiest to get on and off, and most people treat it as a seasonal thing. So during the winter they'll run a hard top, and during the summer they have the soft top on. But you don't need to worry. If you really want a car which has a soft top, but you've only seen a hard top, it is possible to change between the two. Now before we move on to the Exige, I just want to show you the car which is the step between. And that is this car, which is the Elise Cup 250. And it has a sub 4 second 0 to 60 time. Don't just mistake it for an Elise with a bit stripped out though. This is a product at Lotus's motorsport department, and it is a serious track car. It has real proper aero that contributes actual downforce, and you can get some serious lap times out of this car. Now, you might be wondering why you would buy something like this instead of something like an Exige. Well, we'll talk about the Exige in a moment, but basically this is a little smaller, it's a bit slighter than an Exige. Being a little bit lighter too, it is going to be a little bit friendlier on components like tyres and brakes. Not that the Exige is bad, but it can make a difference. Also bear in mind, this car is still powered by the 1.8 litre Toyota engine, whereas the Exige then uses the 3.5 litre V6. And there are a lot of markets around the world where that alone could contribute to a very significant price difference. So bear that in mind. Otherwise, this is very similar to the standard Elise. That is to say, it is extremely good. This sits at the very top of the Elise pile, and this exact car has a list price of around £55,000, as it's very well specified. And if you want to go even faster, you need to go a step up. Now the Exige started life as a slightly more hardcore version of the Elise. So it had a fixed roof and a bit more track focus. It never sold particularly well, and it was very similar to the Elise until about halfway through the Series 2, when the Exige suddenly gained a supercharger. This is long before the Elise did, and then it started becoming an increasingly more distinct model. Now, when Lotus were developing the Evora, to test the Toyota engine that they wanted to use in that car, they built several mules using Exiges with the back half of an Evora stuck onto the end of the car. And all the test drivers had so much fun driving their little contraptions that they decided that really should be a proper car. And this is that car. So compared to the Elise of this generation, it is distinctly different. Now, in very, very simple terms, from about here onwards, this car is an Elise. And from about here onwards, this car is an Evora. It is, of course, not quite like either of those. From the interior, it feels exactly like an Elise because it is exactly like an Elise. Now, it sits with a lot more purpose and aggression because it's got widened arches front and rear. It's got aero on all of the different models. So there are currently 3 models for road of Exige. You have this, the Sport 350. From here, you have the Sport 380, and you have the recently introduced and very limited edition Cup 380. There's about a £12,000 price difference between the Sport 350 and 380. As you'll have probably guessed, the 380 has a little bit more power, has a little bit less weight, but in my opinion, the biggest difference is the fact that the 380 has lots of carbon fiber goodies and things on it included in the price. So if you were thinking of buying a 350, but you were going to option it with a lot of these carbon extras, then the 380 is probably going to be a better value for money proposition. However, don't think even for a moment that the 350 is yesterday's car or old news. It's still a current model, and in terms of performance, you're going to have to spend an awful lot more money than this costs to get something round a track that's anywhere near close. Now, track performance, of course, doesn't just mean a single lap time. Track performance, of course, means longevity, and that's an area where the Exige excels because, like the Elise, it is very light. It is, of course, not quite as light as the Elise, but this car only weighs 1,125 kilos wet, which is an incredible figure for a modern car. Unfortunately, of course, the Elise and the Exige are not available for sale in the USA, and part of the reason is because they simply don't meet the necessary crash regulations over there. The Evora, of course, does, and when these cars get replaced, be under no illusion the cars that replace them are going to have to be heavier simply so that they can be sold worldwide. So please, guys, enjoy these while they're here. If you want some numbers, this particular car right in front of me is about £65,000 list price. It's got a 345 brake horsepower engine, that's 350 PS, the source of the name. It'll do 0 to 60 in about 3.7 or 3.8 seconds, and it'll go onto a top speed of 170 miles an hour. So performance is what Rolls-Royce might describe as adequate. It has larger tyres, larger brakes, basically a bit more of everything than the Elise does, and it's a step up in speed, of course, because it's a step up in money. If you want something very, very serious, and there are certain tracks where something like this, having so much more power than the Elise, is going to be considerably quicker. If you like small, tight, windy tracks or B roads, you're probably going to find that the Elise is quick enough for most situations. But if you want straight line speed and more of it, this is your car. The engine is the 3.5 litre supercharged Toyota V6 from the Evora. It is a slightly different configuration to the current Evora 400. It's the same supercharger setup as the old Evora S. And the reason that this car hasn't been upgraded to 400 horsepower yet is that when Lotus did that with the Evora 400, they had to add a charge cooler and a lot of plumbing associated with that. So it would have added a considerable amount of weight that to Lotus would have been unacceptable in a car like this, which is meant to be focused. Now, because the Exige and Elise are very closely related, they of course share a lot of traits. And number one amongst those is that there are some compromises which are involved in getting the cars to the size and weight that they are. Everyone, of course, speaks about how difficult it is to get into and out of an Elise. Now, I don't think it's actually quite as bad as some people make out, and they're certainly worlds better than the original Series 1 car. But they're not particularly easy, I'll be honest, and certainly if you're a particularly tall or large individual, or you don't have full movement with your legs, as a lot of older individuals can, then they may simply be unlivable cars. And if you want something as a daily driver, they are compromised. There is no sat-nav in them. There's no option for a sat-nav. The stereo is not going to be great because there isn't a lot of sound deadening in the cars, and they are reasonably firm. Not as firm as people expect in terms of ride, but they are compromised. And that is fine because they are focused cars, so you have to compromise. Nobody's trying to pretend that they are, you know, an M3 rival, for example. However, if you want a car that's going to still give you the real thrill of driving, but be more practical, more usable, or you're in a situation where you can only have one car, that is where the Evora steps in. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, he's got several cars, so why did he bother with an Evora? Well, I started off, I didn't know how many cars I was going to have. I hoped it would only be one, and of course it was going to be the Evora. There is a lot more space in the Evora. There are two small back seats, which are nowhere near as impractical as everybody makes out. Most people I know with Evora 400s do have child seats and the associated children in the back. Now, of course, if mum and dad are 6'7", you're not really going to have much luck getting people in there. If mum and dad are 6'7", however, they can still easily get in the front of this, which is not something that could necessarily be said for an Elise or an Exige. In terms of luxury, refinement, interior fit and finish, the Evora is miles ahead of the Elise and the Exige. Do not mistake this for being simply a bigger Elise or Exige. The chassis might look similar, and it's built with the same principles using extruded aluminium sections that are bonded and riveted together. However, it is a completely fresh design, and it is a 15-year newer design than that used in the Elise and Exige. The car is significantly bigger in basically all dimensions. There is a lot more room. The boot is larger. You can, of course, use the back seats. There is a stereo and a sat-nav that work. There's a reversing camera. There's rear parking sensors. The seats are heated. All those things are standard. Price-wise, these, of course, are a little more expensive than the other cars in the range, but not by much, and you do get an awful lot more for your money. So you're looking for one of these at similar money to an entry-level 911 Carrera. And for that, you are getting a car with more power and less weight, and of course, a huge amount more exclusivity and, in my mind, desirability. So if you want a hard number, you're looking at around £80,000 for a very well-spec'd Evora. Now, personally, I think you shouldn't really compare these with a 911. I think you should think of it as a cut-price McLaren or Ferrari, and then you'll probably get on with it a lot better, because if you're expecting half the things you can have in the 911, you're going to be disappointed. Of course, that being said, with the 911, the base price can be increased significantly over list thanks to the extensive options list, whereas Lotus's option list is very modest by comparison. There is another Evora called the Sport 410, and that is a more focused version of the car, so it's lost the back seats, it's got lots of carbon fibre everywhere, they've deleted the AC, they've deleted the stereo, but you can add those back in, and it's got the front seats from an Exige Cup, and it's generally a very nice looking bit of kit. I hope to be able to review one very soon. You may wonder why something like that exists when Lotus already have the Exige and the Elise in their lineup. Well, basically, if you want a more hardcore Evora, you know, like I said, there are people that simply can't live with an Exige, and that car fills that role. And of course, if you live somewhere like America where you simply can't have an Exige or an Elise, that's your hardcore alternative. And truth be told, the cars handle very differently. The Evora, I feel, is a more planted, more stable car. It's a different type of car to drive. In terms of speed round a track, an Evora 400 is probably a similar speed to something like an Exige Sport 350. And so the Evora is going to weigh a little bit more. It's probably going to be a little more expensive to run, but it's still a very, very trackable car. I mean, I've done one track day on my car, and I've put 13,000 miles on it, and my rear tyres are probably only about halfway through their life. And my brakes, discs and pads are still a long time away from being replaced, so it doesn't chew through parts. Now, I know in my videos that I occasionally shy away from making definitive conclusions, but in this case, I'll make an exception, because if, having watched what you've just seen, you're still kind of undecided what car's right for you, here's my best advice. If you're looking for something to enjoy at the weekends as a second car, when it's nice, you know, the sun is out and you just want to enjoy driving, you don't necessarily have anywhere to go, and you maybe want to have the wind in your hair, that sort of stuff, the Elise is perfect. And don't discount the base 130 horsepower, 1.6 litre car either. May not sound like a lot of power, but the chassis is as good as it ever was, and there is still nothing quite like it. In fact, the only thing I can think of that would give you sort of more driving fun is something like a Caterham, which is going to come with a lot of compromise because, of course, when it rains, you are basically stuffed, whereas in the Elise, you can live with it perfectly fine. I do know people that daily drive them, but personally, I couldn't do that. Of course, if you want something that's really fun on the track and even more compromised, something like this Cup 250 is going to be great, but is a bit extreme and is definitely not a car for everyone. Of course, if you want amazing trackability and something that's still a little bit usable, the Exige is amazing. Certainly if you drive fast tracks with straights, or you prefer roads that are a bit more open, or you live in a country with slightly more generous either police or speed limits, the Exige is an awesome car. It looks fantastic too. It's got a real aggression to it, and I really, really like it. The cars are a lot more refined than they used to be, certainly if you have the full carpet and MVH pack in them, and you know, they're livable for sort of short journeys of up to say about 90 minutes or so. But of course, if you want something that is maybe going to be an only car, your daily driver, or if you're moving from something like a 911 or an Aston Martin and you're worried that something like an Elise or an Exige is going to be too much of a compromise, then the Evora is a perfect car. It gives you so many of the thrills and that Lotus DNA that the others have, but in a package that doesn't ask you to make anywhere near as many compromises. It truly is a brilliant and rounded car, and it's a shame that just not a lot of them sell. And I think personally the reason for that is twofold. Number one, people just don't know that it exists, and number two, people see it and think that it basically is just a slightly overweight Exige or Elise, and that it definitely isn't. Hopefully this video has helped explain that a little bit. So maybe an Elise or an Exige is what you want, and that is fine. They're all fantastic cars, and I have to congratulate Lotus as well for being able to have a range that actually is quite diverse. You know, there is a big, big difference between an Elise and an Evora. So yeah, hope you've enjoyed today's video, guys. Please like, comment, subscribe, do all those things that you do, and I'll see you very soon.